Whenever I find or am given bottles like this, my first thought is always, what can I make with this? What kind of cool robot droid thing can I make? And so in this video, I'm going to make a spider bot. To start, I want to build something that the legs will attach to, sort of the thorax of the spider bot. And so I have these two bottle caps here, and they fit together quite nice. I'll glue those together, and this will be where the legs attach to. I'm going to use this model radar dish as a spacer in between the main body and the thorax. It's mostly just to help cover up any messy seam lines at the connection point. I drill a hole in the cap, and this will allow me to attach everything with wire later. Right now, the bottle cap thorax is hollow, and so I mix up a batch of plaster of Paris that I'm going to inject into the bottle caps, and I'm just going to fill that up so that it has a bit more surface area when I attach the legs later, because I'm going to be drilling into it from the sides. Moving on to building the legs, these are pieces from a submersible submarine model that I had a while back, and I'm just taking off these hydraulic looking pieces here. They'll be the transition between the legs and the main body. Here are all the pieces that I use to build a leg. I have a pen here that I'm going to take off the end cap from and just use the plastic tube in the middle. I cut it down to the size that I need, and I also cut off one end. I end up breaking my saw here and just snapping off the rest. Luckily with jeweler's saws, you get like a million saw blades, so no loss. I add one little cap to one side and then a wooden bead to the other. This will be the knee joint. I cover up the holes in the side of the bead with some styrene that I cut out with a hole punch. I also add a plastic cabochon to the top of the cap. I drill a hole in the hydraulic system, and this is so I can add a small piece of aluminum tubing. Not only does this extra piece of aluminum add some fun detail, but it also adds some extra structural support to an area that is only connected by two other small pieces of plastic. I drill a few angled holes in the side of the leg, and then I can attach that hydraulic system in place with some superglue. I'm going to build the bottom part of the leg using these styrene pieces. I'm just going to glue these three together in this stack shape, and then flip it over and glue another piece to the back. Styrene is a great building material that you can find at most hobby stores or online. I cut the styrene block down to the right size, and then I can start cutting it down into the right shape using an X-Acto knife and pushing down onto my cutting table so that I'm not cutting towards my hand. This gets the leg into the rough shape that I need, and then I'll use my sanding sticks and refine it into the final shape. I drill a hole in the leg and the wooden bead, and then I can attach the two together with a piece of wire and some superglue. I'm going to use this broken clip as some extra armor plating, and it's just going to attach like this, but there's a bit too much plastic on the back side, so I shave it down with my Dremel tool and a sanding drum until it sits flush against the side of the pen. I cut out a piece of styrene in this rectangle shape, I bevel the edges with my sanding sticks, and then I attach it to the armor plate just to add a bit of extra detail. This is the other piece of the pen that I cut off, and it will attach to the thorax, and it will give me a space to attach the legs later once everything is painted. And now I can make 3 more to match. And yes, this will be a 4-legged spider bot, not an 8-legged spider bot. Off camera, I drilled 4 holes into the thorax, and this is where those leg connector pieces will go, like this. I ended up breaking through the bottom of the plastic with my drill, and so I'm just going to cover it up with this little greebly. I also ended up losing a lot of the plaster of Paris inside when I was drilling everything, and so I'm adding back some pieces of epoxy putty here. This is a 2-part epoxy putty, and it will act as an anchor when I attach the leg connector pieces like this. I add a little spacer here with a piece of styrene, and then add my cover plate, glue that down, and then I can add my actual thorax base in and attach it with some epoxy, because I really want this to be strong as it's the connection point between basically all of the top half and all of the bottom half. The top of the bottle has a couple of these like dents in them, and so I'm just going to cover it up with a piece of a model airplane and a little rivet for extra flavor. Using the old pen on a block trick, I mark a line around the middle of the plastic, and this is the point in which I will cut it in half. The edges are looking a little rough from the cut, and so I take out some sandpaper and an aluminum block, and I sand those edges down nice and smooth. I want to reattach the two pieces like this with something in the middle to hold them together. And so I rummaged through my parts bin and I found this little plastic cap that fits almost perfectly inside, except one edge is slightly too big, so I ended up cutting that off. I rough up the edges so that the glue will stick on the inside and on the outside, and then I glue one half inside the other half. The other side doesn't fit as well right now, it's a bit loose, and so I'm going to take a piece of masking tape, wrap it around that central plastic piece, and it will make it a bit tighter of a fit and make it easier to glue. I make a couple of antennas using some different size metal tubes, and then after drilling a few holes, I can attach them to the top of the robot. These antennas make me think of Star Wars, and Star Wars is cool, so I'm happy with that. Moving on to making the eye, or eyes in this case, I have this broken piece of a Lego and this car wheel, and they fit together pretty nice after a bit of shaping. I also add a few plastic cabochons in all of the holes for lenses, so this robot has 4 eyes, or at least 4 lenses in total. I add a couple of rhinestone rivets around the center of the robot as well as the bottom. All of the parts get a thorough brushing with a wire brush to make sure that all the paint sticks. This is a very important step because if your first layer of paint doesn't stick, none of your paint's gonna stick. Everything is ready for paint now, and it goes outside for a coat of flat black primer, then followed by a coat of white. Now normally I would just use the cheap Rust-Oleum white, but mine had run out, so I had to use this fancy Tamiya stuff. While that's drying, I start working on the base. I'm using this little wooden plaque from the craft store, and I'm using a piece of foam core with the paper removed. I glue the two pieces together, and then cut around the edges and clean it up with a file. Using a small butane torch, I make an uneven texture by melting the surface slightly. I'm trying out a bit of an experiment with this base. I want it to look like it's a desert and it has that dry, cracked earth look to it. And so I put on a first layer of paint just to seal everything, and then I mix up a batch of Mod Podge and this desert yellow acrylic. I mix up a big batch, and then I put a thick layer over everything, like a much thicker layer than you ever would normally put on. And then I heat it with my heat gun just slightly so a film forms on top, like the first layer dries, but the bottom is still wet. Then I use a beige airbrush paint and my airbrush. I put a thin layer over that mostly wet layer, and my idea was that that first layer of Mod Podge, as it dries, it will shrink and crack that top layer of paint, hopefully looking like that dry, cracked earth. At the end of the day, it didn't quite work out how I wanted it to. It worked kind of and gave a cool effect, but not exactly what I was going for. So I'll keep that for a future project and just go with Old Faithful, some acrylic paint, some baking soda, and I'll mix up a batch and just stipple it on like normal. Once that's dried, I can add some pigment powder just to darken things up and add a bit of detail. I paint the edges with a black acrylic just to make everything look nice. And then I add a bit of foliage so that it's not just a block of dirt. Moving back to the robot now, I'm going to start working on painting. These two colors here are the base colors, and then the rest are kind of the detail colors. I start with my airbrush and this earth tone air color, and I paint the eye mechanism. The eye is the only thing I'm painting with this color, so I'll move on to a dark green next and paint the rest, all the legs, the main body, the thorax, all that stuff. I'm going to add the next few layers of paint with a sponge, and so I break off a little piece, attach it to some hemostats here, and then using this flat green, which is a slightly lighter shade of green than the base coat, I just start stippling on some color. I'm trying this technique out for a couple of reasons. The first is I just wanted to see how it would look, and second, I was feeling kind of lazy and didn't want to hand paint everything with a brush. I'm still kind of up in the air about whether I like this technique or not. I do think it looks kind of cool. It looks like a digital camo, just in a really small print, so I do like that aspect of it, but I'm not sure how it looks overall. I do the same technique with this English uniform on the eye mechanism, and then I move on to a lighter green, in this case a Scorpy green, which is a cool name for green color, and do the same thing over all of the pieces. This adds a lot more of a bright green color to it. I was a little worried at first because this is a very bright color, but I just had to trust the process. When I do all my weathering later, it'll really dull the color back down. Now that we are deep into the painting process, I get to give a shout out to my core builders over on my Patreon. Thank you so much, Richie. You've been here since the beginning, and I really appreciate you. If you would like to join Richie and see your name flying across the screen, you can do so by joining the core builders over on my Patreon. I'll have links at the end of this video, in the description, and on my page. If you'd like to support me and the channel for absolutely free and right now, you can do so by liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing these videos. I read every single comment and I try to respond if I can. As usual, when I was building this project, I really didn't have a storyline or like a purpose for this bot. I did think it was cool that they had this jungle camo, but seemed to be walking through a desert, so maybe there's kind of a story that you can weave with that. I would love to hear down in the comment section what you guys think this bot's story is, what its name is, why it's a bright green bot in the middle of the desert. In the past, I've read some really cool ideas and stories and names for the robots I've made and the droids that I've made, and I love responding to all of your comments. All of the main painting is finished, and so I do a clear coat just to protect that first coat of paint, and then I can move on to some decals. These are just some water decals that I got from my local hobby store, and I'm going to use these twos just because this is the second bot of the year. I just recently got into these water transfer decals, and they are really fun to put on and really add a lot of detail to these models. These are Gundam decals, and I mostly just like them because they have a whole bunch of these little caution signs that I like to put on things. They're super tiny, and you may not even see them in the final product, but they add a lot of nice detail. I added these two decals on the side, and they didn't really show up in the final product because they're black decal on a dark background, which doesn't usually work, and I didn't really think about that as I was applying it, and I ended up covering it in a lot of weathering, but I know it's there, and you may see it slightly in the final product. The first layer of weathering that I use is a black wash. It's black acrylic paint mixed with water and a little bit of isopropyl alcohol just to break up the surface tension. I put it over everything and then I dab away some of it with a tissue or a paper towel just to leave most of it in the cracks and crevices. Using that same gunmetal silver as before, I add some chipping effect with a small brush. This is supposed to look like the paint is chipped away and expose the raw metal underneath. The next layer of weathering are these weathering kits. I like to call them the eyeshadow kits of weathering. They're basically a highly compacted pigment powder, and I use a little makeup sponge brush, make kind of a good rusty, oily mix, and then I just start to rub it on all of the corners and faces of the model. It may not look like much is coming off at first, but once you see it compared to a non-weathered piece, you'll really see the difference. Here we have on the left a non-weathered leg, and on the right a weathered leg. So you can really see how much it darkens it up and takes away some of those really bright colors. I went pretty heavy on this weathering layer because I wanted to darken up these colors, but if you wanted to keep your original colors more, you just have to do a lighter pass. I glue everything together at this point because I just really wanted to see everything together, and with it all together, the final coat of rust wash will look a bit more cohesive. For the rust layer, I make kind of a cocktail between these four different colors, and then I just start applying it to all the joints and the crevices and the connection points. I think I got a little carried away, and by the end of it, I was just covering the entire thing in rust, but this is a good way to start and just pace yourself and make sure you don't accidentally cover the entire thing in rust like I did. It definitely still looks cool, but I added a lot more rust than I had originally planned. All this rust just adds to the story of this bot and the mystery of what it's doing. This is the final layer of weathering, and after everything is dry, I just hit it with a clear coat, and then I attach it to the base, and this project is pretty much done. Let's see those final shots, shall we? Thank you all so much for sticking around till the end of the video. This project was supposed to be kind of an easy one this week because last week's was a bit more complex. Turns out this one was not as easy and simple as I thought it was going to be, but it was still pretty fun to make. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, put them out in the comment section and I'll try to get back to you. If you like this video, consider dropping a like, consider subscribing. I have got a bunch of other videos on my channel, and if you like this one, you're almost guaranteed to like at least one other. I've got links in the description below to all of the tools and materials I use on my Amazon shop, so check those out if you're interested. I've also got links to the Galeri shop, where the airbrushes are from, and a coupon code for 10% off your order. That's all from me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.